Welcome to my channel. So today I want to talk about the Mora Classic. And why does this knife still remain so popular today despite, all the other options available from Mora? Why does this style of knife remain so popular? And I think there's a lot of reasons, and I think it's a knife that a lot of people, if they thought about it, probably want to have one to add to their collection and to use. So let's talk about this thing. So the Mora that I have wasn't actually called a Classic when I bought it. It was this one, if I can get it close enough, is a Frost's Mora. So you can see it says Frost's on it. It's laminated steel. And I bought this in 2003, October of 2003, at a woodcraft store, the woodworking store here in Oklahoma City. And back then these weren't called the Classic. This was just a Mora knife. It was, they were kind of unique back then. And this knife had several firsts for me. Number one is my first Mora, which I've really come to love Mora knives. Second, it was my first knife with a laminated blade. So I don't know if it'll actually show up on video, but the edge is laminated. There is and it actually says it, right here, it says laminated steel. The edge is actually, you can kind of see it right here, where the edge is a harder steel than the outside layers. So there's 3 layers, 2 outside layers that are softer steel, center layer that is harder. That's supposed to give the knife some ductability or flexibility without it being brittle, and yet a really hard edge. Today Mora makes their Classics with just a single steel. It's a 0.1% carbon steel that is, or a 1% carbon steel, not 0.1. 1% carbon steel that is similar to 1095. Great steel. They do a great job heat treating them. They hold a great edge. But back then, the laminated steel is what they were really known for. And so, like I said, this is my first Mora, my first laminated steel knife, and also my first scandi ground knife. Now, if you've never used a knife that's scandi ground, you may not really understand what that means. Basically, there's one bevel. It's kind of wide, and it goes right to the edge. There's no micro bevel at the edge. This is just one bevel all the way to the edge from right there. So it makes a very acute angle on the blade, and they're just wickedly sharp. And being this hard, very hard center lamination of steel, these things, they just get incredibly sharp. So today I want to talk about why this style of knife that Mora still makes a similar version. That the new ones are, like I say, they're not laminated steel, and the handles are, I think they're a red color, but they're still wood. What makes these so enduring in terms of a knife? Well, I think there's a couple of things that have to do with that. Number one is just a great blade shape, great profile that is just very usable. It's just a great shape. It's easy to use. It's very flexible in terms of different ways you can use it. Very durable. They're great not only as an outdoors knife, they're also very good as a craft knife or use in a woodworking shop. So they're very popular for that kind of use. The current version that is made today, like I say, is a little bit different in that it's not laminated steel and the handle is a red color. But other than that, it's a very similar version of this knife. So why are these so popular? Like I say, great blade shape, a handle that is very ergonomic. So this barrel-shaped handle is symmetrical from end to end. It's symmetrical from side to side. So it'll work in any grip. You can grip it just about any way you want, in any configuration. It'll work, and it feels about the same. It's very comfortable. Also, this was the first knife I also ever had, a fixed blade knife that didn't have a hilt of some kind. And when I first got this thing, it was almost kind of a little scary. I mean, I just imagined what would happen if my hand slid up onto this incredibly sharp blade. It was going to be kind of, it's kind of like riding a bike for the first time with no training wheels. It was a little scary. So I had to get used to that, but now I find myself often, if I'm needing just to use the tip of the blade, I'll use a pinch grip where I'm holding the knife pinched in between my fingers, you know, with my other fingers back on the handle, trying to make sure I stay off the blade, and that way I can carve with the tip of the knife, and you know, effectively shorten its blade. And I do that pretty frequently, and I've never cut myself doing that. But when I first got it, and the first time you use a knife of this style, you may find yourself a little concerned about getting your hands up on that blade. But with a little bit of practice and being careful, you won't have any trouble. These are just a great knife. Now the new one, this one in 2003, the Frost part number for this was an S-1 or S1. Today they call this one the Classic 1, number 1, but this has a 99 millimeter blade, whereas the current number 1 has a 75 millimeter blade. It's a little bit shorter. And then there's a number 2 that's, I think, 105 millimeter or something like this, a little bit longer than this. So this kind of falls in between the 1 and the 2 currently made. I actually think that's a good thing. If this was just a wee bit shorter, you know, like I say, when I'm choking up on this knife, if it was just a tiny bit shorter, I think that would make it even more useful for that kind of carving work. So I think that decision to go with a slightly shorter blade on the current version of this, the current number 1 Classic, is a good thing. May have to get one. Now the current one, the current handle is a little fatter. Now this is a 106, which is one of my wood carving knives, but it has the same shape and size handle as the current Classics. So you can see, let me just try to do this without cutting myself. You can see that the 106 here has a fatter handle. It's thicker and fatter and a little more hand filling, and I think it's a good change. They fills my hand a little bit better. So the current Classic has this handle, a little more hand filling. I really like it. Might be another reason I should get a newer one, but the like I say, the current handle is a little bit fatter, and sheath isn't much to speak of. It works. This wedges in there nice. It stays in. You kind of have to wiggle it to pop it loose. I was a Boy Scout leader for a number of years, and I bought this in 2003. My youngest son was 16 at that point, and so I wasn't a Scout leader much longer, a couple of years after I bought this. And though we were camping every month, we would go rain or shine every month. Our troop would go camping, and so I used it some. But it has really spent more time in my workshop. As I've mentioned in other videos, I build and repair musical instruments as a hobby. And so this has been a very useful knife in that shop, you know, like carving the heel of a guitar or violin neck, or the transition from the neck shaft to the headstock. That transition has to be carved by hand, and this type of knife is very useful for that. I these days tend to use the 120, which I've done a video on, which has a shorter blade, or this 106 for that. So I bought those since I have purchased this. And some might ask, why would you buy, you know, one of the wooden classic ones like this, when you can actually spend less money and get something like this 510? About the same blade size, you know, similar profile, all carbon steel. Got a very comfortable handle, but why would you pay actually a little bit more for the Classic than this? And here's what I think the answer is to that. And I think it all has to do with the wooden handle. I think that there is a connectivity between man and wood. I think that we are very connected. Now, I think another example of that is in the Opinel. These knives from France, Opinel in France, are incredibly popular. They're very similar to the Mora in a number of ways. Very useful designed knife, very affordable, wooden handle, very simple, not complicated. You know, there's no high-speed, low-drag kind of thing going on here. This is a very basic, very simple knife. But I think, like I said, there's a connectivity between wood and man, trees and man. So there's an author that I know of that I love his work. His name is Eric Sloan, and I have a few of his books. This one's called The Reverence for Wood. And I don't normally do this, but I want to read an excerpt from this for you here, just a paragraph or so. But I think it really, you know, when I try to think about how to communicate that connectivity between man and wood. After reading this, I realized I couldn't say this any better than he did at all. So let me read, I'll be quick, but I'll read this to you. That century of magnificent awareness preceding the Civil War was the age of wood. Wood was not accepted simply as the material for building a new nation. It was an inspiration. Gentle to the touch, exquisite to contemplate, tractable in creative hands, stronger by weight than iron, wood was, as William Penn said, a substance with a soul. It spanned rivers for man, it built his home, and heated it in the winter. Man walked on wood, he slept in it, he sat on wooden chairs and ate at wooden tables. He drank and ate the fruits of trees from wooden cups and wooden dishes. From cradle of wood to coffin of wood, the life of man was encircled by it. He also writes, one of the remarkable things about wood is its self-expression. Whether as the handle of a tool, as a dead stump, or alive in a forest where every branch is a record of the winds that blew, it is always telling something about itself. This is why man has an affinity with wood, not only as a mere material, but also as a kindred spirit to live with and to know. So, certainly Eric, like I said, if you've never read his books, this is The Reverence of Wood by Eric Sloan. If you've never read his books, I highly recommend them. If you're into woodworking at all, he's not only an author but an artist. All his illustrations are hand done, beautifully done, and his books are just really incredibly they're great. He has another one here called a museum. A museum of early American tools. He's also an antique tool collector, and he writes about them. And he has a piece here that I think also is really illustrative of creating tool handles out of wood. He says, while we're on the subject of the handles of old tools, I would like to point out that the collector should understand something of the philosophy about the connection between the workman's hand and that part of the hand tool that he touches. Most modern workmen will scoff at the idea, but any fine craftsman will tell you that the right wooden handle helps you along with your work. A metal or plastic handle, or even an incorrect wooden handle, can feel dead and not spring back under pressure, thus causing blisters and slowing your work. The proper handle's feel or heft is the unexplained quality that a fine violin has to the musician. The Oxford History of Technology quotes Christian Barnum's comments on an exhibition of early hand tools. Everybody who appreciates the qualities of materials loves wood. And here was wood formed into a special kind of tactile sculpture made to be felt with the hand. I remembered that old craftsmen, when they buy a new set of modern chisels, throw away the handles and carefully fit their own. These handles, polished bright by a lifetime of use, become part of their owners' lives. So, tools with wooden handles have, I think, a connectivity to us that's different from plastic and metal. And when we live in a world today where we're surrounded by polymer and plastic and metal and electronics and all this high-tech stuff, I think there's a thing that draws people to something simpler, to something that is, has a more of a connection with our history, has a connectivity to nature. The wooden handle has an organic feel, a warmth, a life that plastic just doesn't have. I like this Mora 510. It's a great knife, but when I hold it, the plastic just feels dead. It's cold. It's comfortable, but it just doesn't feel like a wooden handle. Wooden handle it warms your hand. It's comforting. It's familiar. There's probably a whole range of adjectives you could apply to a wooden handle. And those that use hand tools and those that have wooden handles will understand what I'm talking about. But a fine tool with a sharp blade and a wooden handle is something that just creates connectivity to the user or the owner. So I think that has a lot to do with the popularity of these. So, you know, a great blade shape, the scandi grind, which is just amazing to work with, the connection with history, but also the wooden handle, I think is so important. And again, I think it speaks to the popularity of the open L pocket knives. So popular, very affordable. And again, I think people look for ways in their lives to connect with something less technological. Like I said, we live in this age of, you know, digital everything and computers and whatever. And I think this speaks to the popularity of things like typewriters and fountain pens and film cameras that are coming back and tools, antique tools. I think people in all this high-tech environment we live in are looking for a way to reconnect with something more traditional, more connected with nature, to more grounded. I don't know. I mean, you could probably just, like I say, come up with a million different ways to describe it. But I think people are looking for something that brings them back to earth, you might say. Anyway, that's my take on the Mora Classic. I think that's why they are popular, will probably remain popular. And like I say, I have this one. I have the two carving knives, the 106 and the 120. But after making this video, I think I might have to get me just one of the new classic number ones with the red handle, just because I like them. Anyway, that's the Mora Classic. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love it if you'd leave me a comment. Always appreciate it when you watch my videos. And as always, thanks for watching.